Hey everyone, it is February 6th, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to be talking about Launch Center Pro for the iPad, in-app purchases, Flappy Birds, and all the week's news. This is the iMore Show. So Peter Cohen is running a little bit late, but he should be joining us soon. Right now, though, I have a phenomenal guest lined up for you. It is the one, the only, David Barnard from Contrast. How are you, David?
Good, good. A little cold.
You are dressed like someone living in Montreal, David. What's going on?
It's Texas, and we don't have very good heat.
How cold is it?
I'm in my office, and it just doesn't have very good insulation, so... I don't know, it's probably like 45 inside my office. I think it's about 25 or 30 outside.
Also joining us, as always, the managing editor of iMore.com, Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Hey there, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. David is dressed as though he is about to explore in Nunavut.
Yeah, he does not look comfortable at all.
I'm actually comfortable, but it takes this to be comfortable.
Okay. I just look comfortable looking at you like this.
It doesn't get cold enough in Texas often enough for me to hassle my new landlord, so I'm just riding it out for now.
I see.
All right. So, David, people who may not be familiar with you, the last time we spoke, you ran a company called AppCubby. GasCubby was one of your biggest apps. You'd launched Launch Center Pro. A lot has happened since then.
Yeah, I have been busy. AppCubby is now Contrast and launched a weather app, Perfect Weather.
Did it warn you about the snow?
Yeah. Well, we don't have alerts, but yeah, I knew it was coming.
And Launch Center Pro just went iPad, which is exciting.
It did, yeah. We were really excited about that. It launched last Thursday, a week ago today.
So what did it take to get, because there's all these stories about how Apple struggled to get Notification Center or Siri onto the iPad. What did it take to get the Launch Center Pro interface on the iPad?
It was a surprising amount of work. A lot of people, and I joked about it on Twitter a few months ago when somebody said, "Oh, it's just a few lines of code." We really spent months, getting the grid to work properly, handling rotation. Thinking through some other aspects of the UI, and then just troubleshooting and debugging, and it was a ton of work.
So I guess some people think that all you have to do is check a little box on iTunes Connect, and all of a sudden the iPad version spits out.
Yeah, I wish it were that easy. This is actually my first iPad app, and it's partly because of that, because it is just so much work and a huge investment, and so doing it right, doing it well is a huge investment. I have seen apps that essentially just blow up the normal version and don't do anything different. And we, with our grid code and everything like that, it was pretty much rewriting a lot of that. So it's a lot of work.
Is this your first iPad app because the kind of nerdy, geeky people who use Launch Center Pro want to be able to use it on multiple devices?
Partially, yeah. And as Vitisi posted, finally, as soon as it came out in 2012, we had a lot of requests for the iPad version, and it was a combination of many things. One, we still have a list, 50 or 100 things long of stuff we want to do. And so we were trying to focus on getting the iPhone version as far along as we possibly could. But secondary, we thought a lot about use case. And, the way I use Launch Center Pro most is calling people, texting people, doing a lot of kind of iPhone-centric stuff. And so it was partly that Justin and I weren't using our iPads as nerdily as, Vitisi and others do. And so, it took us a while to warm up to it being needed as much as we thought it might be on the iPad. And then it was also just a big financial risk, to take months building an app, and essentially, building the iPad version was almost like building a new app. we relied on a lot of the existing code base, but again, it was just months of work. So in the App Store, anytime you spend months on something, you really hold your breath to see if it's going to pay off. And thankfully, Apple featured us as the editor's choice last week, and that was huge. And so, hasn't paid back all our time invested yet, but it's certainly further ahead than we had anticipated at this point. So
just backing up a little bit,
excited.
I was a bad host because I forgot. Some people may not be familiar with Launch Center Pro. So Launch Center Pro essentially lets you launch actions instead of just apps. Can you explain a little bit about what its use case is on the iPhone and then how you move that to the iPad?
Sure. So there's so many things that you do on a regular basis that take a lot of time. So like if I'm gonna text message my wife, I do that probably 6 or 8 times a day. Well, typically you go to the Messages app. I may be in a conversation with Justin or my brother, so you tap the little back button, and then you scroll on the list because she might not have been the one I last spoke to, and then you look, and then you tap in there, and then you have to go, bring the field active to type, and then you type. And if I'm doing that 6 or 8 times a day, not just the time, but also the mental burden of having to think every time I want to message her, and there's so many other things like that. But in Launch Center, it's one simple tap, and I'm typing a message to my wife. And so I have a whole grid of things that I do, and some of them can get really complex. So one of the ones that I use constantly as well is pCalc has a great URL scheme. And when you launch a calculator, 99% of the time, you just want to start fresh. But pCalc wouldn't want to do that because if you're in the middle of a calculation and you multitask to another app, or there's a lot of reasons pCalc wouldn't want to just clear it. But most of the time when I launch it, I just want it cleared. So I can launch, and as it's launching, it tells pCalc to clear. And so I can just start typing in and do quick calculations.
So the way it works is that there are these things. Apple does not provide, well, in iOS 7 they provide audio app-to-app communications, but outside of that they do not provide a built-in, nothing like Intents or Contracts in Android or Windows Phone, but they have these URL schemes where you can pass little chunks of things, and in essence via a link to another app, and then there's a callback that gets you back to where you started, right?
Right, and not all apps support callback. Like Apple's apps don't support callback, and a lot of apps don't support callbacks. But yeah, and using callbacks, you can chain all sorts of crazy things together to hop from one app to another, doing things like
But it's work on your end, and it's work on every one of those developers' ends.
Right. We have to build it out. So, but there's tons of other cool stuff. We added a lot of Dropbox actions, and so you can access Dropbox files and share links. And so, if there's a GIF that you use a lot, and you have that link handy constantly, and so it's just one tap to message that to a friend or post it on Twitter or things like that. And so, or if there's a file you use a lot and want to share it via email, you can set up a predefined email action that fills in the text and a link to a Dropbox file, or attach things, attach pictures. I'm not selling it very well here, but it's pretty much Pandora's box on iOS. I mean, it's just once you start digging in, there's so much you can do.
It's a power user's best friend. That's how.
Yeah, the goal is really just to save time and speed up things you do on the iPhone. So everyday actions, everyday tasks that you do on your iPhone, you just set up a quick shortcut, and Launch Center Pro makes it faster and easier.
So you mentioned that you didn't use it that much on the iPad, but someone like Federico Vitici from MacStories.net was absolutely doing that. So what were you being bugged for? Quick actions to launch new Python scripts in editorial?
Yeah, and so I mean, now that I have it on the iPad, and now that I'm using my iPad more, and it's funny because I've had kind of a tortured relationship with the iPad. The first few versions of the iPad, it's like the first version was so revolutionary. You just used it because it was so amazing. But then when the
internet in your hands.
Yeah, and then the Retina version came out, and it just kind of felt sluggish and heavy, and I just found myself using it less and less, especially once the iPhone 5 came out with the gorgeous screen, with the taller screen, I just found myself on my iPhone more, and the iPad just sat in a cupboard for months at a time, and I'd have to like go find it. But man, this fall when the new iPad Mini and iPad Air came out, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a huge leap in form factor. I mean, it's massive leap. And so I actually carry the iPad Mini and the iPad Air with me everywhere now. I carry both of them back and forth from the office every day, and so I actually switched between them, and I've really started using the iPad quite a bit more. And so there's so much that you can do on the iPad productivity-wise now, and Launch Center Pro enables those same kind of shortcuts. So you want to fire up a Python script that does some crazy things. You want to send text to editorial and have it do things. It's just a great way to start those kind of tasks and have this centralized place to get to websites, to message people. I actually set it up too to where my kids can FaceTime the grandparents. So there's the little picture of their grandparent in Launch Center Pro, and then they know they can launch Center Pro, tap the picture of grandma, and boom, they're FaceTiming with grandma. So
and that sounds silly,
all
but
sorts of stuff.
That solves real problems. Like my mother uses FaceTime, but she has to go to the app, she has to go through the list, and when she's swiping the list, she accidentally hits a button, and there's no confirmation, so it starts FaceTiming me or my sister by accident. She has to stop that. Then my sister thinks she missed a call, so she tries to call her back while she's trying to FaceTime somebody else. And again, it sounds silly, but it solves real problems.
No, it really does. Yeah, and we've talked about, and we haven't really found a way or thought of a way that we feel like we can do it well. But we've thought about kind of that market of kids and grandparents who just you want to set up an iPhone for a grandparent and say, here are the 10 things they do. They call the grandkids, they call the kids, they FaceTime a couple of people, and that's it. And Launch Center Pro is a great app to just say, tap on this app and tap the picture of who you want, and you're done. So that's kind of a marketing angle we definitely need to work on. But yeah, it really solves real problems, and it's pretty cool to me that my kids can do that. And even my 3-year-old daughter, if there were an emergency, she would know how to grab my iPhone and call my wife, because it's so easy. She just knows how to tap on the picture. So it's pretty cool. We need to work on that marketing angle.
I want to transition this a little bit because Peter's been writing about this lately, and I know something's been that you've been thinking about. You had another app that you were experimenting with in-app purchases because the App Store has evolved in ways gross and foul, like good and bad. And one of those is the value of the App Store it seems to keep diminishing. Like it's harder to make money. When you rank on the App Store, you don't make as much income. We all want great apps, which means developers have to be able to feed their families so they can keep making us great apps. But at the end of the day, we don't want to really spend money on them. So we've got this in-app purchase economy now, and it just seems like there's no decent balance where a developer can make a great app and get paid for it, and we both benefit from the transaction.
Yeah, it's tough, and I have been thinking a lot and writing a lot about this, and emailing Apple executives and stuff like that, just saying, look,
help.
Yeah, well, it's just that I think the trajectory we're on, and it's not necessarily fully realized yet, but the trajectory we're on is that you're just going to see less and less meaningful productivity apps, less and less meaningful entertainment apps as everyone starts chasing the money toward this free-to-play scheme. And we already see it to a certain extent. I mean, you look at the top grossing list, and it's packed with free-to-play games. And so if somebody comes into the App Store economy and says, I want to build an app, what are they going to do? They're going to look at the top grossing list and say, that's where the money's being made. I'm going to make that. And so, one of the things I proposed to Apple, and I hear they've read my emails. Well, who knows? But I would hope that Apple internally is studying the App Store to look at the profitability of apps. They've featured a bunch of really cool apps in their Your Verse iPad commercial. And I wonder, I haven't found a list, and I couldn't. I spent some time trying to figure out each app that was in the commercial, and some of them I know are very profitable, but some of them aren't, or likely aren't. Again, I don't know all the apps, but I would hope Apple's studying that to see, hey, if we think these apps are cool enough to put on a national or international TV commercial, that's a centerpiece of our iPad strategy and all that, if those kind of apps aren't profitable, people aren't going to keep building those kind of apps. And those apps that they're bragging about today are going to be the abandoned apps next year if they're not making money. And so, we're just kind of at a weird place with the App Store economy where tons of money is being made. I mean, they're bragging about $15 billion.
It's all going to Candy Crush.
It's surprising. I did some, very, very rough back of the napkin math, and my estimate, again, very rough, but that, the top 100 free-to-play games make up more than 50% of the revenue that they're bragging about. So, the other $5 billion $5 billion in 2013, $7.5 billion paid out to developers, but the other half, it's still a heck of a lot of money. So it's still a thriving economy, but it just says something when such a large portion is being dominated by that type of app. So yeah, we'll see where things go, and we'll see. I mean, Apple has a lot of tools at its disposal to shape the App Store. And they can and do, and even them featuring Launch Center Pro as an editor's choice, I feel like was kind of a statement of, hey, we care about productivity apps, and that's one of the ways that they can shape the App Store is by featuring paid apps and by featuring productivity apps and things like that. And so, but there's tons of other stuff they can do too. Search is horrible right now. Search in the App Store is terrible, and improvements they make to that isn't just about user satisfaction, but it's huge for user satisfaction. I mean, I hear all the time from people, I went to the App Store looking for this and couldn't find it. Or I hear somebody say, I have the best idea ever. You should make this app. And then, I spend 10 minutes searching in the App Store and I find it. And they say, I searched for days. I couldn't find an app that did that. So user satisfaction with search in the App Store must be terrible. But beyond that, it's terrible for developers. You build a great app, you optimize it for iOS 7, and Apple's not rewarding that. And I think a lot of people discount the importance of search because it's not necessarily the biggest traffic driver to downloading apps, but it's incredibly important to developers because it's free eyeballs. So if you show up in search, you're not paying for that user acquisition. You're not having to get press for every new update to the app and things like that. And every other aspect of getting eyeballs to an iOS app these days is incredibly competitive and difficult and expensive. And so search was one of the things that, if you can get eyeballs via search, it's a great way to maintain some traction and to, maintain profitability for an app and to encourage and incentivize updating the app. But, you search Twitter in the App Store and Tweetbot and Twitterific and apps like that showing up towards the top. No, total crap. And so, I could go on for another 30 minutes about stuff like that. But anyways, I think Apple has a lot of tools at their disposal to shape the App Store in a different direction and take us off the trajectory we're on with the App Store. But, it's yet to be seen whether they see it as a problem and whether they're going to do something about it. So we'll see.
What's your take, Peter? I know you've done several pieces about the value, especially in the gaming market, of how things are going.
Well, from my own personal perspective, I hate in-app purchases, and I think that they're a scourge. Simply because I've been afflicted by them a number of times, in games that I enjoyed playing, but feel like I'm having my wallet drained in order to play, and I don't like that. I think it's kind of a cynical view of how to develop a relationship with a customer to buy the product. I certainly understand it from the developer standpoint. The developers who are making money are very happy with the process. It's fallen into government purview lately. With Apple, of course, recently having to make an arrangement with the feds to make them happy as to how in-app purchases were going to go in the future. But the interesting thing that I keep coming back to is that we get exactly what we deserve. When the App Store first launched, application software for iPhones was reasonably priced. $5 here, $10 here. You were getting your money's worth out of good games and good applications that were providing real functionality for you as a user. And then, in fairly short order, within a few months, there was this race to the bottom, where developers found that they could climb the charts by lowering the price of their applications, and the price of those apps got lower and lower until we got to the 99-cent mark. And then, as soon as Apple introduced in-app purchases, the free-to-play market just exploded, and things have never been the same since. But why is that? It's because users of these devices have a very unrealistic expectation about what sort of functionality software that should be added onto it should have. I keep coming back to something that Merlin Mann said once, which is, it's a good thing that my Viking grill came with all those free steaks. The point is well made, though. You buy an iPhone, and you're spending serious money on an iPhone, whether you pay outright the $650 that an iPhone 5S actually costs, or the $1,200, $1,400 that you end up spending over the course of a 2-year contract with conventional wireless company like Verizon or AT&T with their subsidies. You spend all this money on a phone, but then you expect to get the software for nothing? That's crazy. But the problem is that the App Store doesn't provide you with a really clear way of differentiating crap from good. Discovery, as we have just discussed, is a problem. So free-to-play makes it very attractive to people because, hey, I can download this thing and use it, and if I want to give them money, I will give them money. But I think that when you're talking about microtransactions of $1 here, $2 there, people can quickly lose track of how much money they're actually spending. And before you know it, you're in the hole to a game $15, $20, $30, and there's no end in sight. From my perspective, at least some of this could be ameliorated if there was some kind of cap system in place, in which developers either voluntarily or involuntarily had a cap on how much their app would ultimately charge the customer. And once you hit that cap, that was it. All the functionality, all the features were unlocked, and that's fine. Obviously, this would take some changes to the way that gaming is managed, because many of the free-to-play games you have to pay in order to win. Those games,
so hold on, how is
I
that
think, should just go away.
Some people say that that's just like the old arcade machines. You'd have to keep filling quarters into them, Peter. That to keep playing, you got to keep feeding that quarter machine. But it feels substantively different to me.
It does, yeah, it does. And then, I mean, quarters, 25 cents here, 25 cents there. Sure, you're going to get that one guy who, what's his name, the Donkey Kong champion
King of Kong.
Right, King of Kong, who undoubtedly spends thousands of dollars amassing skills. But most people are content to drop their quarter here and there and be done with it.
Or the kids show up to the arcade with a pocket full of quarters, and it's their $5 entertainment for the weekend that they saved up their allowance, and they blow it and they're done and they had a great time. It's not, instant credit cards, spend thousands of dollars. I mean, it's a big difference in the physical nature of putting coins into a machine and going to the change machine to get your quarters, and this infinite transaction. Not to mention, they're digital consumables, so they absolutely cost nothing to the companies who are selling them. Whereas in arcade, you were paying for more than just the gaming experience. It was a physical place that you went to that paid rent, that paid for electricity,
Employed
that purchased the games, that employed people. So
emptied the ashtrays every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, but so the analogies really break down quick, and I hear people use that all the time, but that analogy breaks down so quickly. It's a completely different world.
So let me ask this, David, because what I find helps is when you state the problems and you try to think of non-complicated ways to fix them. And it seems to me like there's three problems here. One is that people, I mean, we were offered Super Monkey Ball at $10 when the App Store launched, and after a while we decided that it was too much risk to spend $10 on a game because you couldn't try it first. You basically had to buy it sight unseen, and if it sucked, you were out $10. I remember paying $30 for a Post-it note app on the Trio, but there wasn't that much software. The App Store introduced vast amounts of software, so the ability to buy bad stuff was magnified. To combat this, developers started lowering prices, and then people learned to wait for the sales, wait for the low price, so people didn't buy full price anymore, and eventually developers kept their prices low and went lower, and you started racing to the bottom. And it turns out that we wouldn't pay $10 for a game, but we would absolutely pay $10 to either get a better looking farm or to get anything that made it, or a higher score, anything that made us feel better than our friends. The third problem is that Apple did absolutely nothing to stop this. So this practice went on, the prices went lower, people became more desperate to make money, so the schemes increased. I think I read today about a guy who buys old apps, reskins them, front loads them with ads,
Yes.
and then waits until they get burned out and then just makes a new skin. Incredibly user hostile, but he's making money on the App Store, which is a shame because I'd rather you make that money, David. So I don't know how to solve... So we have to solve the risk aversion. We have to make it so that people aren't afraid to spend the money up front. And then we have to solve the monetization problems so that developers can afford to make good games. And Apple has to do something so that the value of their App Store doesn't go to zero and people start looking elsewhere for that kind of consumable.
Yeah, well, yeah. So that's a lot. But to Peter's earlier point, I don't think any kind of a cap would work, or EA would throw a hissy fit, and because the thing is, they're making their money on the whales. So if there were a realistic cap of $50, profits in iOS gaming would just drop off the cliff.
People spend $1,000 on Candy Crush some weekends, they said.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane, and so trying to implement that drastic of a solution, I think, has some pretty deep ramifications for the entire platform. For one, if Android ends up, so if Apple did that and Google didn't, then the developers would focus on where the money was. So if Google Play let you keep doing those microtransactions, then we'd start seeing a lot of big games go Android first. And so, I mean, there's just it's a really tough thing to solve, and I don't know that I have any specific answers. But a couple things. A lot of people don't realize this, but even though Apple allows game developers to do all sorts of crazy stuff with digital consumables, there's actually some pretty strong rules around in-app purchase that don't allow developers to decide what they're going to do. So I can't release a time trial that triggers an in-app purchase. So my mileage log app, I'd love to say, hey, check this out for 2 days. If you like it, here's a $10 in-app purchase. And it's $10 in the App Store right now, and a few people are buying it. It's doing fairly well. But like you said, that's a huge hurdle to jump. And fortunately, it's in a niche that people are willing to spend $10 because it delivers true value to them. But if I could do a 48-hour free trial, a 7-day free trial, whatever, and throw up an in-app purchase and say, hey, if you like the app, $10.
Could Apple
I can't do that.
Could Apple allow developers to opt into demos where after a certain amount of time the App Store itself would pop up a thing saying if you'd like to continue using this, please pay, or is that a level of complexity they don't want to impose on their users?
You know, Apple could solve it in a lot of different ways. When iOS 7 was in beta, there's a thing called App Store receipts that developers can now access. And when iOS 7 was in beta, that receipt included the date of purchase. And so that receipt that developers can access through the App Store, it doesn't have personal information, it doesn't have credit card information, it's just a receipt saying this user, as a developer, we don't even get, an email or a login or anything. We just say this user who's using your app right now purchased it and right now it only gives us a version, but in the beta of iOS 7 it actually gave you the date of purchase. And so if in iOS 8 they re-enable the date of purchase, then developers could roll their own. And I've argued for a long time that developers rolling their own free trials is surely no worse than the scourge of a lot of the psychological manipulation and other crap that's going on in gaming. And there's other things. Apple says you can't have a demo app. You can't have a light. There's all sorts of really weird restrictions around certain aspects of in-app purchase, and yet they let these free-to-play games get away with murder with the psychological tricks and stuff. So you can push both ways, where they could start to enact, because the rules, it says right on the rules that we're going to change these over time, and Apple legally can and does change the rules over time, so they could slowly start adding rules that made it harder for the kind of in-app purchases that we are talking about that are psychological manipulation and stuff like that. Because I'm not like Peter. I don't think all in-app purchases are bad. I think there's some game my son plays where you buy level packs. That's great. Hey, we played the game for free for a while. It's really cool. We buy a couple of level packs. Great. It's the Candy Crush where it tricks you into buying because you're about to solve the puzzle and you need to spend those gems or whatever it is to finish solving the puzzle. I mean, that's and it's digital consumable. It's not unlock the level and you get the levels. So Apple could create some rules that made it harder, and then Apple could loosen the rules in other areas so that game developers could experiment with other business models. I mean, if you could do a time trial, if a real racing kind of app lets you do a time trial and then unlock the whole app for $60. But a really discouraging aspect of all this is that a lot of Xbox One games now that have you pay $60 for the game, they have in-app purchases too. So I mean, it's not just iOS, and I mean it's really just the entire game industry finding ways to make more money. And so a crack dealer is always trying to find more ways to make money. And so it is what it is, and whatever you think about it, morally, business tactics, relationship with the user, and everything like that.
Well, let me just ask you this,
personally, I think they're screwing the future of gaming by doing all this. I mean, it's not going to be any fun anymore, and it kind of already is. I mean, Justin has an Xbox One and a Wii U, and he plays the way he tells me all the time, I hate the Xbox. Every time I go play, everybody else has power-ups in Call of Duty and stuff. I'm not going to go spend $100 getting all these power-ups, so I get killed, and it's no fun to play. And so he plays his Wii U. So I mean, and that's the whole thing with other aspects of the App Store too, is that we're on this trajectory of milking users for every dime. And I don't think this trajectory ends well. So I hope that Apple and game companies and independent developers start experimenting and pushing in another direction to get us off this current course.
So just I want to move along, but just to get some of the things that get thrown back at developers are you're just not being creative enough. You could, for example, only let someone log one trip a day with the basic version and then unlock more trips. Or you could do subscriptions where you have to subscribe inside or outside the app in order to use it. You're just not. But all of those seem to be, again, to make a worse experience for the end user.
I want to make one final point here, and that's something we haven't talked about, and it's probably a little controversial, and that is that Apple, it's not in Apple's vested interest to make it harder for people to spend money on in-app purchases, because after all, they are getting 30% of the cut of every in-app purchase that gets made. Let's not forget that. And that is why we're seeing really obnoxious, shitty games like Dungeon Keeper from EA, which just got released.
And featured
getting the editor's choice from Apple, where any review I have read of the game flays it alive for being nothing but a money grab. Why is Apple doing that? You know, because it's in Apple's interest to push games that are moneymakers.
Well, see,
and
Apple makes
moneymakers.
I mean, what Apple makes in the App Store on their 30% is a drop in the bucket compared to what they make on devices. And so, what is in Apple's best interest?
Agreed. But as incremental as that is to their hardware business, it is growing, and they are looking at that number, and they recognize that it's growing, and they want to nurture that number. They want to make that number bigger. So, you know, software and services is a growing. From quarter to quarter, it has been a growing part of Apple's bottom line, and you know they would not be in the best interest of their shareholders to look at how to maximize that.
But what Apple has always done is maximize user experience over counting every penny for the long-term benefit of their platforms, and that's what's so surprising to me about the App Store is that it seems like a very short view to look at that money they're making on the 30% versus the long view of if we can groom and maintain this amazing ecosystem of games and apps and productivity and entertainment
and our customers' trust.
And our customers' trust and great user experiences. If we can continue shaping the App Store in that direction, it's going to continue making great money for a long time, and it's going to continue supporting our other goals as a company, and that's Apple, and that's why I'm so confused by the current state of the App Store and by them featuring things like Dungeon Keeper, because Apple is known for completely ignoring the bottom line in certain areas in order to enhance user experience, but the user experience of the App Store in these games and games like Dungeon, it's terrible. And so it is surprising that Apple featured Dungeon Keeper as heavily as they did and promoted it as strongly as they did, and it's surprising. It would be surprising to me if they really are at an executive level looking at those numbers and thinking we have to promote games like Dungeon Keeper because it's going to keep making us at 30%. That would surprise me if that's really how they looked at it. But you're right. Like the way they're running the App Store right now, sure seems like it. So
Neil in our chat room is saying that user reviews are the only reliable way to get games and apps, even products. He uses the feedback extensively to make buying decisions. But as we've recently seen with all those rate this app dialogues, the ratings get gamed. It's the way Apple has it set up is it's. Well, go ahead, David. You understand this way better than I do.
Oh man, did you see? I retweeted today Dungeon Keeper since we're talking about it. It pops up this little thing and it says, you know, what would you rate Dungeon Keeper? And if you say 5 stars, it sends you to the App Store to rate Dungeon Keeper. And if you say 1 to 4 stars, it says, what can we do to make it better? Send us an email. So Dungeon Keeper is manipulating those reviews. And I can't believe Apple stands for that kind of crap in the App Store. And I mean, that kind of stuff is going to be hard for them to police. Other than just saying, hey, you pull this crap and we're going to pull your app from the App Store. You know, they try and police a lot of stuff through the app review process, but it's easy for developers to avoid those things to come up during review. You know, you just say, don't launch it, don't show this dialogue until the app's been launched 10 times or whatever. So App Store reviews are easy to manipulate.
Well,
I mean, people relying on that for information, it's not as good a source of information as you think. The way people
I don't know if people understand how bad it is. Yeah, well, so that aside, Will Shipley had a great article in the Loop magazine. Peter, quick plug for the Loop magazine. That it was hard for a developer because even if you have a 5-star rating, every time you update your app, that is thrown away in your started new. So if a bug creeps in, maybe you'll get 10 1-star ratings, and then literally your income drops to the toilet. And every time that keeps getting reset. And I know like the Google apps all have rate requesters. Instagram has a rate requester. It's been a huge source of controversy lately.
Yeah, and I mean, it just is what it is. You know, you want to make money, screw your users. That's kind of where the App Store is right now. So, you know, you want to make more money, interrupt your users right in the middle of doing something. I mean that's, and you know, I mean, I know a lot of great indie developers who use that, and you know, Will said he uses that. I don't. I keep thinking I will, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, there are some times where the ends justify the means, and you know, if you can throw up a as non-intrusive as possible, please, you know, rate us, and it keeps you in business so that you can keep, you know, enhancing the app. Is that a bad trade-off for the user to spend a couple of minutes or be interrupted and enable you to keep adding more features? It's ultimately not a terrible trade-off to get interrupted to do that, but it just sucks that we as developers have this choice of, you know, interrupting and annoying our users and wasting their time or making less money. And you know, so far I'm trying to make money, you know, without doing that to my users, especially an app like Launch Center Pro. You know, you're trying to get in and get out, and so if we threw up a rating dialog, you'd be right in the middle of just trying to make a phone call and throw up a rating dialog. No, that sucks. So yeah, it's horrible.
Peter, you thought they should die, right? You wrote an article saying all the ratings should die.
Yeah, you know, quite frankly, this is where I'm going to disagree with our listener Neil. I don't think user ratings are worth anything, and I would like to see the rating system completely dismantled. First of all, I think that the actual star rating system, and by the way, I don't just mean for the App Store specifically. I hate ranked systems that rank something from 0 to 5 or 0 to 10. I think it's ridiculous, it's arbitrary, and it's meaningless. And I've worked with these systems, you know, for most of my career, and I hate them. And I don't think that they're any use because they don't give you any clear objective measure.
There's no context.
There's absolutely no context whatsoever of why the user thinks this way, and you see that reflected in the ratings all the time. You know, I gave this app a 5-star review because I like the icon, or because the characters in it are cute. You know, whatever. Not because, you know, the game is playable, the soundtrack is good, you know, the art is fantastic. I got my money's worth out of it. Just arbitrary reasons. So, you know, the user reviews themselves frustrate me to a certain degree as well, but at least there's context. At least there, if somebody is writing out a thoughtful review of a dozen words or 24 words or maybe a couple of paragraphs, you can try to get some context and understand what they like about the app and what they may dislike about the app. Now, far fewer of those people are actually going to write a review of an application than just a facile rating of 0 to 5 or 1 to 5. But I think you're going to get more context and meaning out of that anyway. But yeah, I just want to see ratings gone. I think they're useless. So not only that, but I think that they're potentially very detrimental to the developer itself, because heaven forbid the developer should release an app that has one small bug in it that is a showstopper for a certain segment of the population, because that will kill the rating of an application, and in some cases the developer will never recover. There's nothing that they can do to try to make people get that app once the buzz is gone.
Yeah. And so just to reiterate that point, right now Launch Center Pro has 3 different 1-star reviews that say that we don't have any documentation and there's no help. In the app, in the default database, when you launch the app, there's a tile that says help. We made that like a default tile. You tap that, it opens up Safari to our help site. We have videos that we made. We have extensive documentation. We have sample actions. And we really put a lot of time into this stuff on our help site. And we get 3 1-star reviews that say no documentation, you know.
And you can't answer them. That's another thing.
Yeah, what do you do?
You have no mechanism to respond to that.
You just can't win.
I think the bottom line here, folks, and we've been talking about this for, you know, ad nauseum at this point, is that in many ways the App Store is fantastic. It gives developers unprecedented access to a huge base of potential customers, and it gives people who have these devices access to a huge wealth of software that can make their devices do unimaginable things. But the system is very, very flawed. And I don't think that there's a facile, easy fix to any of this. I think it's a systemic problem. I think that a lot of things have to change for it to dramatically improve, and I don't think that Apple has a vested interest. Unlike you, Dave, and I hate to say it, I really don't think that they've got a vested interest. As focused as they are on the user experience of their products and their software, I don't think that translates into really being able to affect what third-party developers do for their platform. Otherwise, Microsoft Office 4.2 never would have happened for the Macintosh way back in the day.
Well, no, but see, the App Store is a completely different place. The software market for the Macintosh, historically, because the Mac App Store is a different ballgame. But, and I've argued this many times, that, if you think about the App Store like an economy, the U.S. economy, our government pulls the strings of the economy through multiple means, through tax law that incentivizes certain spending. I get a tax break for having a mortgage, so I'm incentivized to not pay off my mortgage. The government uses a lot of means to shape the economy, the U.S. economy, to manipulate it, to all sorts of ways. Apple has a lot of tools at their disposal to shape the App Store. They reject apps for doing certain things. They don't allow porn. They don't allow this. They have a ton of rules about what you can and can't do. And like I said, I can't release a timed demo. I can't release a, there's certain things that I'd like to experiment with freemium apps that
Amazon can't go to their own store inside the App Store.
Apple shapes the App Store through featuring apps. Apple shapes the App Store through their relationships with developers. There's through the code that they release for us to have access to, through the WWC videos and the Tech Talk videos. They have a huge influence, and I would argue, more so than any computer system in history, Apple has control of this software market. And Mark Cuban's actually been tweeting a lot lately and wrote a blog post about App Stores should be more open than they are, because Apple does wield its control. They pulled a Bitcoin app today, the last big Bitcoin app. So Apple has a control. But where I totally agree with you, Peter, is that it doesn't seem like they're wielding it in the direction of better user experience, which is very unlike Apple. And so I agree that it doesn't seem like they're viewing it in that way. It seems like they're viewing it as a moneymaker, and they're not viewing it as a user experience problem for their users, and I think it is.
And if I remember right, their payout to developers doubled last year. It's been at an increasing rate. So a lot of developers are making a lot of money. Some developers are making a ton of money. Others aren't. It's just, but nonetheless, every time $1 is spent on the App Store, Apple gets 30 cents of it, and not all of that is going to overhead. Apple is making a certain amount of profit off of it, and
sure.
Hopefully they won't lose the forest through the trees, because it's a critical problem. However, as bad as things are on the App Store, it could be a lot worse. We could be talking about Google Play here.
So let me ask you guys this. Flappy Bird, the #1 app, I think The Verge had an interview with the developer, and he's making $10,000 a day. $50,000 a day, so that's over $1 million a month off the ads in Flappy Bird. I tried playing it. I can get to 3. I know some people on my leaderboard are at like 104. Jeez. But this game, no one seems to understand how this game got there. The closest thing I can figure out, if it's all above board, if it's all ethically done, is that it's rage of mouth. That people play it, they get exasperated with it, but they just have to tell their friends about it, and then it's a competition to see who can get the highest score before physically breaking their phone. And I don't know if that's happenstance or genius. Peter, I don't know if you've had a chance to actually play it, but it's it's both a brilliant and a horrible game at the same time.
It is, and my emphasis is on horrible more than brilliant. It is an extraordinarily difficult game to play, and anybody who can get double digits, let alone triple digits in it, my hat's off to you. I am totally awed by your skills. I don't think that Flappy Bird is going to be around for a long time. I don't think it's going to have the longevity of a Candy Crush Saga or a Clash of Clans. I think it's a flash in the pan. I'll be curious to see how fast this guy, this Vietnamese developer who created it, can cycle through irritating ideas and keep the ball rolling. But
he's got two other games in the top list right now, neither of which are as quote unquote good as Flappy Birds.
Right. So we'll see what he does going forward. And I obviously, as soon as this game got on the radar, a million other app developers looked at it and say, okay, how can we cash in on this? And already there have been a few knockoffs and a few copycats. So I don't think that this is going to have an enduring legacy. But this is going to sound a little bit hypocritical, maybe, based on what I just said on about Apple. But the game is free. He's being paid through the advertising that's being shown in the game. More power to him. I hope he makes a mint and keeps the ball rolling. I don't see any particular downside to it. When you're done with it, as I was in about 5 minutes, you delete it off your phone and then never think about it again.
Yeah, you did the math to 50,000 a day is 1.5 a month, but I mean, this is we're like 5 days into the craze, maybe 7, and it had been rising before, but it really hit critical mass, I think, just a week ago or less. So we'll see if it lasts a month and he actually cashes in at 1.5 million, but or more. I mean, he can make a crap ton of money, but yeah, I think Peter's right. I think these kind of apps, capture our attention. It's Gangnam Style, it captures the attention for the moment, and then it fades away. I have my suspicions about it going viral the way it did. There's a shocking amount of there's a big seedy underbelly in the App Store that I don't think Apple even always realizes is going on. There's a company I'd like to point out right now, but I'm not.
Well, that guy earlier today we were talking about who skins apps, he front loads apps ads that send you to get other apps. There's this whole thing for paid placements and a lot of stuff that is not really above board.
Yeah, and there's bots that you can buy ratings, you can buy downloads, there's a lot of ways to manipulate things, and so it does raise a lot of red flags to have this supposedly individual developer in Vietnam being able to make something like this happen through just viral stuff. So more power to him if it's all. What's that?
The people who do play it do seem to have some sort of, especially the younger ones, do seem addicted to it. Like they do want to beat their friends. It seems to have at least that. Like the gameplay seems smartly enough tuned that once you play it, you kind of want to win at it.
Yeah, and I actually think the game is brilliant. And I know a lot of people have gone back and forth on like, oh, it's crap, or but there is. If you go back to some of the early successes in the App Store, like Doodle Jump, like part of what was really fun about Doodle Jump is that you jump a few levels up and you fall and you're like, hey, crap, that sucked. But it's so easy to do it again. And so there's a really strong game mechanic to that, like fail early. I always kind of thought, the Icon Factory app, Astronaut?
Yeah, Astronaut.
Yeah, that was such a gorgeous game, had really fun gameplay.
So was RamChamp.
Right, RamChamp too, but specifically the Astronaut, I always thought that it should have been harder. That if you'd have flown around a couple of planets and crashed and blown up. So anyways, I think that there is a really great hook to that kind of gameplay, and so I do think an app like that could have gone viral and just raced up the charts. It just seems a little fishy the way it all happened. I think it's a crappy app that's fun in its own unique way. So yeah, more power to him.
Peter, The other sort of the last app sort of related story I wanted to touch on briefly was this idea of names in the App Store, and it was started because Facebook put out an app called Paper, and then 53 got upset because they already had an app named Paper, and a lot of people sort of leapt to their defense, saying, "How dare giant Facebook try to crush this independent developer?" And a lot of the same people who were upset that King had tried to trademark candy and stop other people from using the word candy weren't so upset that with the Paper incident, but then it turns out that there was another company before 53 that had an app called Paper, and they had spoken to 53 because they were upset about it. I don't know how to reconcile all this. I do believe that there's a right way and a wrong way to handle app naming, but it seems like, again, the App Store doesn't really do anything to help guide its usage.
Yeah, I think that again, this is an area that Apple has to police, and I'm sure that Apple will police to a certain degree. Clearly, if you've got a product that is infringing on an existing product's name or concept, that's an issue. The issue here is that Facebook Paper has absolutely nothing in common with Paper by 53. That's a drawing app, a very good drawing app too, but it's got nothing to do with how Paper works. So I think that it's only an issue as far as these two companies want to make it. We've certainly seen cases before where a big corporation will sort of swoop in and hound a little guy for doing something that they feel infringes on one of their copyrights. When it happens on the App Store, I'm not really sure what can be done about it. I personally think Facebook Paper is kind of a lame name for it. I think I understand why they were going for it, but I think they could have been more creative with the name too. Like maybe calling it Flipbook or Faceboard. Yeah.
How do you approach names on the App Store, David? Are they something that you think need to be unique and harshly defended, or do you think there's room for like Marvel's Avengers because there was already the British version of the Avengers movie?
Yeah, I mean, so as some are aware, I've had my own little spat with trademark law. I had, my company was AppCubby, and a big publicly traded company logged me in, released Cubby app in the App Store. And so, that was a long, horrible process with lots of lawyers and lots of money trying to sort out what to do. But ultimately, there are laws, and Apple does actually police trademark on the App Store quite a bit. If you tried to release an app called, Apple Candy, they'd probably,
Apple Candy Paper.
Yeah, exactly. Paper Apple Candy. If it's a really tricky thing because there's so many different things at play. So like some of my apps in the App Store, and I've said this on Twitter, I blatantly name them for SEO. So Mileage Log Plus is named Mileage Log Plus because if you search for Mileage Log, it gets better search ranking because it's an exact match. Timer, same thing. So that's a really unfortunate SEO hack that I've used, again, just to try and make it. I mean, better to use little hacks like that and actually make some money than stand on some principle or whatever. I don't think it's a principle, or I would, but ideally you would have a unique brand. What's challenging in the digital age, and this is what I realized when I was rebranding to Contrast, is trying to find a unique name that's not been used 100 different ways in the digital space for a website or a consulting company or this, that, or the other. It's incredibly challenging. But I'm not a lawyer. I did spend like 30 or 40 grand talking to
money
them
on
about
lawyers, but
trademarks. Yeah, but from my understanding, the key in all of it is something sold in the same marketplace, and would it cause confusion? So, for a huge brand like Apple, they can reach much further with their trademarks because they operate in so many different markets. But here in Austin, we have a company called Apple Leasing. And so they can operate as a leasing company in the state of Texas, not violating the trademark of Apple Computer, because it's a very different type of business. It's long established and everything like that. But I do think that Facebook really stepped on Paper's toes there or 53's toes in calling it Paper, because when you have a similar good in the exact same market. From now on, there's going to be tons of confusion. Hey, did you check out that app Paper? Well, which one? Facebook Paper or 53 Paper? So, Paper 53 is not completely innocent in this, in that, they've tried to pick very simple, straightforward names. Like their stylus is called the Pencil. Well, pencil, you can't search for pencil and get a meaningful result because it's such a common word, and paper similarly. So if you're going to name your product something such a common word, it's going to be a lot harder to defend it legally. It's going to be a lot harder to create brand and differentiation. So ultimately having these two apps named the same thing in the App Store, I think Paper has a case, and a fairly strong case, but ultimately they chose a pretty common word. So it's going to be hard for them to, walk down this road with enough confidence that they could, force Facebook to rebrand or get their pound of flesh. So
the alternative is the drug market, where you've got like these absurd drug names.
Yeah.
Like, try our new acid reliever, Flopsy Mopsicam, or whatever. It's just you can get these ridiculous names, and all of them are unique, but none of them are memorable. The same thing goes for corporate branding. I remember when Verizon got introduced, I kind of scratched my head and I'm like, it sounds like it should be a word, but it's not, and it irritates me. An entire generation of people have been ruined in writing the word Segway and not referring to the stupid little two-wheel thing that you ride around on with handlebars. I've seen the word SEGUE spelled SEGWAY so many times. It's one of those cases where branding has just ruined the actual meaning of, well, in this case, a phoneme. There's no end to it. But you're right. It's difficult when you've got. How many millions of developers are there in the App Store at this point? There's
there's over a million apps. So
there's over a million apps. There's like 500,000 developers, if I remember right. Right, Rene?
Yeah.
There's an incredibly large amount, most of whom have not released apps because everyone just signed up.
Because everybody signed up, to get the betas early or whatever, right? Probably half of them are probably tech reporters, actually. The vast number of apps, there's going to be a lot of overlap with product names. It's just it's that simple.
There's a Miley's log that just logs Miley Cyrus, I'm sure.
Nice.
All right, I'm going to switch to questions before we wrap up. We had a couple. We had a little bit of follow-up. Etienne wrote in to say, someone asked previously why there was no AirDrop on older iPhones, and I said it's because they didn't support Bluetooth 4.0 until the iPhone 4. And he responded that it's actually Wi-Fi Direct, not Wi-Fi Direct, the trademarked name, just to make it ironic, but Wi-Fi Direct, the ability to set up ad hoc peer-to-peer connections between devices were not into the later chipsets. So the previous, I think it was 2 or 3 shows ago, someone asked that question, but that's why there's no AirDrop on the older devices. KA asked about, I did this article about why there's no FaceTime for Android. It's basically because FaceTime, Apple's being sued by a patent troll over FaceTime, and they've still not solved the case. And you can't make an open standard out of something that could be sued, by anyone who produces something that uses that standard. I also did an article about why I was rage quitting Skype. So people just asked, why don't you use Google Hangouts for everything? And here's my take, and I'm interested in yours. So Google Hangouts does not solve this problem for me, because Google Hangouts, as much as Google says that they're cross-platform, they're not. They service iOS and Android. There's no Mac app. I really want a native client. Like Skype has a native client, and FaceTime has a native client on the Mac. There's also no versions for BlackBerry or Windows Phone, and two-fifths of our site The people there use BlackBerry and Windows Phone. Google just has not made Hangouts available to them. So Peter,
arguably the web experience of Google Hangouts has been far and away above the native Skype experience. So there's something to be said for Google's ability to deliver a web app.
Well, yeah, but Skype sets a pretty low bar.
Well, yes.
Google Hangouts iOS native app is fine too. The Android app is spectacular. The iOS one is good. It could be better, but it's good. So that's just the reason why we don't use it. It's because I'm sure Phil Nicholson at Android Central would love it to be our default communications tool, but it's just not everywhere yet. And until it is, we can't use it. Appy and Me asks, and this is a common question we get. Apple's been doing a lot of security stuff. There's a lot of concern that people still steal iPhones too much. They've put Touch IDs on the iPhone now, but they've also activation lock, so you can't activate an iPhone unless you know the Apple ID it's associated with. But Appy and Me and a lot of people have asked, Peter, and I'm curious for your take on this because I have some reservations about it. Why not just make the ability to shut down an iPhone require your Apple ID? So if you go to turn off the iPhone, not just reboot it, not do any of those things, but to actually turn it off so that people can't detect it anymore, you should have to put your passcode in to do it.
I don't really have an opinion on that. It sounds like something that would be more trouble than it's worth, though.
My only concern is that you have to be able to put an iPhone into recovery mode if anything goes wrong, if it freezes, if there's a bad firmware install. And once you can put it into DFU mode, it's effectively, as far as I know, offline anyway. And in order to make a DFU mode password protected, it would defeat the purpose of DFU mode. Because
DFU altogether, right, yeah, of course.
So that's my only instinct, is that the Apple hasn't found a way to do it that both preserves your ability to troubleshoot but makes the iPhone safer.
Those are really tough problems to solve. I think it's easy to complain, but Apple has done far more than anybody in the history of computing for this kind of stuff. I mean, Find My iPhone and the level of security that we have with being able to wipe the device and stuff. I mean, 5 years ago, that kind of stuff was only available through like Enterprise, BlackBerry, pay out the nose kind of stuff. So, it's hard problems, but at least they're working toward solving it, and they've alleviated some. They're moving towards better and better solutions.
I agree with that completely. And the thing is that, the kind of conversations we have about this are the ones that Apple has. And the thing is, you have to do the repercussion modeling. It's easy to say Apple should do this, but what are the repercussions of doing that? What does it prevent? What does it stop? What are the use cases or the edge cases that would be totally screwed by it? And once you do that, I'm just searching for the Twitter questions quickly, it makes it, you could say, okay, there are none, so Apple should go ahead and do that. Or, these are the showstoppers. This is why they're not doing it.
Right.
All right, so Peter, George, I'm going to have trouble mispronouncing this. George Matropavalos is asking, you did an article today on, if there's a new Apple TV, then the Mac should get a version of Front Row that kind of corresponds to it. So he'd like to know what you want to see in that next generation Front Row.
What I don't want to see in that next generation.
So what you do want to see.
Oh, what I do want to see. Well, and this is shooting for the moon because I know it'll never happen, but I'd love to see the next generation Front Row not entirely dependent on iTunes library management, because I've got some serious problems about how monolithic iTunes is getting. And I'd like to see that broken out a bit.
You just got to buy into it, Peter.
Surf the wave.
I have all my stuff now in iTunes, and we use the Apple TV for everything, and we pay more money, but it's easier.
Well, the focus of my editorial specifically was to talk a little bit about the absence of Front Row on computers now. And it's been gone since Lion. It's been gone since 2011, which is really ironic because in 2010, Apple introduced a Mac Mini with an HDMI port built into it for the first time, making it arguably a perfect little HTPC or home theater PC, and there is a call for home theater systems, and you can certainly install home theater software on the Mac, Media Central, for example, or Plex, or even XBMC. They're all very difficult to configure and use, though. If you're the average muggle, you're going to run into problems right away. I've had a lot of problems configuring them, and I've got probably a higher than average level of experience setting these things up. But I would love to see Apple make a one-step process for ingesting all of your media, not just the stuff that you get through iTunes, but stuff that you get elsewhere too. If I buy a Blu-ray and it comes with an ultraviolet version of the download, like it did with Pacific Rim, for example, instead of an iTunes redeemable redemption code, I'd love to see Front Row manage something like that. There's another aspect to using an HTPC which can be a lot of fun, and that's gaming, and that's something that we can't do with the Apple TV yet. I don't know if the next generation Apple TV is going to have this capability, but when you made it with something like Steam, which has a function called Big Picture, which is designed to enable you to play your PC or Mac games on a TV set with a handheld controller instead of having to use the keyboard and the mouse and a regular computer screen. It could be a lot of fun, and it would sort of wrap up all that stuff together in one. Having an easy conduit for that sort of connectivity would really be a lot of fun and would be very interesting.
I'm with you there. I would also please, Apple, please just make universal spotlight search for the Apple TV, and if you do Front Row for Front Row, because having to go into each individual channel and then searching just sucks. I just want to know where, if I can find it on Netflix, fine. Otherwise, send me to iTunes.
My TiVo can do this. Why couldn't an Apple TV or a Front Row type of interface?
Mark wants to, I'm going to ask you this, David, because you and I have a long history of discussing iOS 7 together. Mark asks, what's your opinion of iOS 7 now? Do any of you still wish you could go back to iOS 6 or iOS 5?
I've come to terms with it, and now when I go back and use a device that's on iOS 6, it looks so dated and so strange. But I'd have to go back and look at some of my comments about it at the time. But I was never like a hardcore like we need to keep iOS 6. My perspective was always there's some aspects of iOS 6 that made a lot of sense that still to this day present user experience challenges on iOS 7.
You had usability issues, if I remember right.
Yeah. So I mean, to this day, the disappearing toolbar in Safari on iOS 7 drives me nuts because I never know how to activate it. If I'm trying to tap a link at the bottom of the screen, it brings up the bar and then scrolls me, and then now I flick really hard to get it, or does it? Do I tap? It's like a constant mental burden when I'm in Safari on my iPhone of like, where's the tool? How do I get it? So it's things like that there are aspects of iOS 6 that I wish were integrated into iOS 7. It's not that I would want to go back to iOS 6. And what I've always said, iOS 6 was kind of the refinement of some very solid ideas that went back like 8 years. I mean, Apple had been working on the iPhone UI for a long time before they shipped it, and those were like the fundamental concepts of multi-touch user experience, and they iterated on those for years and years, and iOS 7 was a pretty big reset.
And they had to do it in public.
They were doing a very big reset on some pretty fundamental concepts in a very short amount of time. And so like you were talking about repercussion analysis for, security implications of various, attempts to make stealing phones harder. Well, they didn't have time to think through all the user experience repercussions of some of these changes he made. So I love a lot of iOS 7. I love the fresh look. I love the bright colors. I've got on board with a lot of that, and I do actually like that they toned down the green a little bit in iOS 7.1 on the messages icon, the phone icon, and some of their greens are a little less retina searing. So yeah, that kind of stuff I still like. But overall, I think iOS 7's great. I think we're moving in a great direction, but it's been a rough road. And I mean, yeah, I don't remember ever having so many bugs and resets and other issues. From a development standpoint, we've had to fight all sorts of odd iOS 7 things and do some hacks. Right now in iOS 7.1, the progress bar API is broken, and so we're like holding our breath with perfect weather. Like, do we write our own and fix it, or surely they're going to fix something so fundamental as a progress bar, but it's broken. So, it's been a wild ride on many levels, especially for developers this fall. So, I'm looking forward to iOS 8.
What about you, Peter?
What am I looking forward? I'm sorry. What's the question? I kind of lost the thread there.
What's your opinion of iOS 7 now, and do you wish you could go back to iOS 6 or iOS 5?
Oh, absolutely not. In my weekend job, when I'm looking at iOS and Mac devices that people bring in for service, I am quite often actually handed an iOS device that's still running iOS 6 or in some cases iOS 5, like the original iPad. And no, I wouldn't want to go back there. I look at it now with sort of the nostalgic fondness that I have for seeing classic Mac OS after switching to OS 10.
Like your bell bottoms and hang glider collars. Right.
Or I think, more to the 80s and 90s split, the hair mousse and, pop collars on denim jackets sort of thing.
So we've got a bunch of questions about iOS 8, but I'm going to skip to one that I think I actually have an answer for. So Armando wants to know, when will Apple fix the unlinking our number to iMessage problem? So many steps to fix this. Grr, it's like a bad ex-girlfriend. So what he's talking about, I think what he's talking about is if you switch phones away from the iPhone, you've actually got to go in and unlink your number from iMessage, or people who are using other iPhones or Apple devices are going to keep using the iMessage system, and you're not going to get their messages. And this again goes back to repercussion modeling. It is impossible for Apple to know when you're stopping using iMessage because you're taking your SIM card out of the phone, but they don't know that you're actually leaving the iPhone. So they have no signal to stop this. You have to go and tell them, I'm not using this iPhone anymore. It's very hard to imagine a system that would work for everybody that would pick up some cue that you're no longer using your iPhone. Like if it's 8 days, 10 days, whatever, maybe you're traveling with a different iPhone. Maybe you got a different SIM card in because you're on a job. It's very difficult to set that up. So Apple has no idea you're leaving the iPhone. You have to tell them. Now, Apple could arguably do a better job educating people about this, but, do they pop up a thing saying if you ever leave the iPhone, remember to, go turn off your iMessage? That's not workable either. So all they can do is put an article up for support. We can write about it on iMore, but at the end of the day, it's a very, very difficult problem to solve. I'm just trying to think it through right now. I have no idea how I would tackle it any better.
Great point.
So that brings us to the end of this fun-filled edition of the iMore Show. If you were watching us live, thank you. I really appreciate it. If you're not watching us live, of course, you can watch us at your leisure on demand. Either, you can subscribe in iTunes, subscribe in RSS, go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/iMore video, and watch the show anytime you like. I want to thank David Barnard for joining us. David, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find your apps, and where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter, drbarnard, Barnard. You can find my apps at contrast.co, and you can find my blog. A lot of the ranting I did today is available in long form on my blog, davidbarnard.com.
Awesome, and we'll have links to all of that in the show notes. Peter Cohen, lovely as always. Where can we find you?
On Twitter at Flarg, Flargh, and at iMore.
You can also find me at iMore. You can find me at Rene Ritchie on all the social things, although it's plus Rene Ritchie on Google Plus because they're different. And you can find me on iMore.com and at Mobile Nations. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next time. Thanks, David. Thanks, chat room. I'm going to stop the broadcast so they don't have to put up with us anymore. But you guys are all lovely, handsome, and intelligent, and I hope to see you next week. We are live now.
Hey.
People can actually see us.
Fantastic.
You look so cold. You look so cold, David.
I am very cold.
Well, I guess you don't have. Do you have central heating in your house?
I'm not in my house. I'm at my office.
Okay.
And no, well, our office does have central heating, but our particular vent, because of where we're located, goes above the building in exposed air, and then comes down. And I don't think it's particularly well insulated. So
is this an actual Contrast office?
Yeah, this is Contrast HQ.
Nice.
The echo means we haven't furnished it yet.
So do you like, because I work out of my home, but Phil Nickinson, who runs Android Central, he recently got a house just because, not a house, he recently got a small office just because it was easier for him to do his podcasting, and his working there, it was less of a distraction.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I ended up doing. I wouldn't say being at home was super distracting, but honestly, I think it just kind of led to a lot of life imbalance and bad habits. And honestly, it's kind of interesting that Apple tech would inspire it, but I'd always seen people with those bands and counting steps and all that, and I really thought nothing of it and just had no desire to ever wear one of those. But when the 5S came out and I downloaded David Smith's app, and I'd kind of known, I should be more active and everything, but it was shocking that, walking from my bedroom to the kitchen to my office, back to the kitchen to the living room, I mean, I was walking, low hundreds of steps a day, and I think it was just pretty unhealthy for me to stay in my PJs and work from home. So this has been great. Justin has a desk right over there, and he's not here today, but it's been great. So
he can't photobomb you?
Not today, not today.
I've never seen a Justin photobomb. I'm looking forward to that now.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll find a way.
Yeah, I had the Nike Fuel Band, I've had the Jawbone Up, and I've had a Fitbit, but I like that the M7, it was always, they would get in my way when I was typing, or they'd run out of charge and I'd have to recharge them and forget to put them back on. I like having that built into my iPhone.
Yeah, and then, I mean, I heard some people talk about how, for women who put it in their purse, it's pretty much useless. But I mean, as a guy, I'd always have my iPhone in my front pocket, so it's just the perfect. That's the kind of, I know that there's a little bit about what's that new app, the Felton.
I don't know it.
The self-actualization.
No, I didn't see it.
It's track everything about yourself so that you, gosh, what's that? I can't think of the word, but
quantified life.
Quantified self. Yeah. Quantified life, self, whatever. And I just don't have a lot of interest in spending. I think The Verge said he spent 79 hours tracking in 2013, and I mean, I guess you make that up in productivity increases and knowing yourself better and, setting better goals, yada, 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 yada. But for me, I don't want to sit for 79 hours tracking. But what it seems Apple is heading towards with whatever kind of fitness band or watch they do, and what they did with the 5S is what I think we're ultimately headed towards, is to that kind of data without having to invest a lot in inputting the data.
Well, that's the thing with those how-to apps as well. Like not the how-to, the to-do list apps and the task manager apps. Is some of them are so complicated, I feel like I need to put a line item in to use the app. And the ones that are very simple that I can just put things into and go out of, they seem to enable me. It's not like I have to add a task just to add my tasks.
Yeah, exactly. We thought about. I've thought about that a lot with my apps over the years, like Gascubby. For a long time. We were hoping to partner with gas stations, and actually had several discussions with Shell, a big oil company here it's globally. But what I would have loved to have done was partner up with them to where you swipe your Shell Perks card, and they already have all your data, and then that can be automatically entered. And so, I think it's actually a huge, an interesting kind of future industry to be able to track more and more data with less and less work.
Yeah, I think that's the key too, because and we'll talk about it on the show, but people can be the single biggest point of failure in any of these chains, and the more you can remove us having to do things manually, the more chance are we'll do them.
Right. Yeah. Or the more chance, not even that we'll do them because we don't have to do them manually, but the more chance they'll just get done.
Yeah.
So
that we'll benefit from them.
But yeah, and I agree on the task management stuff. Like for me, I use this app called Listacular, and it's a Dropbox text file based, and so all of its formatting is just straight plain text. And so, you can create to-dos and create different text files, but on the Mac you can just see a text file. In the app, it kind of parses the kind of mini Markdown-esque. I think it's kind of like notational velocity, maybe, where it's just asterisk for to-dos, and then you can just have plain text. And anyways, real smart little app, and super easy to get in and out of. Just simple text-based lists, but it's super handy.
And you probably have a bunch of Launch Center Pro actions for that already.
Well, he's working on them, yeah.